He pointed the gun without thinking. The silence of the funeral was shattered by his own fear. Arlington National Cemetery stood still under a slate-grey sky. The early morning wind cut sharp through the rows of pristine white headstones. Families, huddled together, silent, some clutching folded flags, others barely breathing. The sound of the bugle pierced the cold. 3 short notes, 1 long, then silence. A soldier was going home, a flag draped over a casket, a mother with steel in her spine but water in her eyes. A folded note in her hand, and at the edge of the crowd, a man stood alone. Black, tall, wearing a crisp dark suit. No medals, no entourage, no camera, just a fixed gaze on the coffin of a young man he knew too well. He stood back, not out of disrespect, but out of instinct. Sometimes, even in a funeral, it's safer to be alone. From across the cemetery, 2 white officers watched from their squad car. One of them leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "See that guy? In the back." "Yeah?" "He's not military. No family around him. That suit's too clean. Might be planning something." They didn't check with command. Didn't radio anyone. They just opened the doors, adjusted their belts, and moved in. The officer in front, Matthew Marshall, 38, walked straight toward the man, right hand resting on his holster, left hand raised in authority. "Excuse me, sir. I need to see some ID." The man didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't offer anything. "I'm not showing identification at a funeral." The other officer flanked him from behind. Crowd murmurs began to ripple. Phones shifted from laps to hands. Someone started recording. "This is a lawful request. Hands up." Still the man didn't move, his voice low, level. "You're making a mistake." Marshall drew his weapon, without hesitation. No threat, no resistance, just the twitch of fear trained into instinct, and pulled from the holster like second nature. That's when she stepped forward. Dress uniform. Grey hair pulled tight, eyes like ice cracking. She didn't shout, she commanded, "Put that weapon down, now." Marshall blinked, confused. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Major Lynn Carter. That man you just pulled a gun on? He's Lieutenant General Allen. Ross, he led the mission that brought my son home in that casket." You could hear it, the stillness, then the clicks, not of guns, but of cameras. Marshall lowered the weapon, but nothing else lowered with it. Not the eyes on him, not the judgment, not the truth. The general still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. He stepped forward slowly until he stood inches from Marshall. His voice, when it came, was a whisper loud enough to carry through generations. "Your name, officer?" Marshall didn't answer, but by then the whole country already knew it. It was 48 seconds, shaky, filmed from a phone behind a row of tombstones. No commentary, no editing, just a drawn weapon, a funeral in silence, a black man in a suit, not moving, and the question that echoed through every screen in America. "Your name, officer." By sunrise, it had already passed 1 million views. By noon, it was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and TikTok side by side. Every frame told a story people had seen before. But not like this. The internet didn't need details, it had eyes, and what they saw was a man calm, quiet, dignified, being treated like a threat at the funeral of a soldier he helped bring home. Headlines exploded. "General held at gunpoint during military funeral." "Cop points. Gun at black hero. Is America still blind?" Honor meets humiliation in Arlington. Inside the Pentagon, the silence wasn't out of confusion. It was strategy. General Hayes, Chief of Staff, watched the video on loop. He didn't react. He stood still, like he expected it. His aide, Captain Ung, nodded. His records clean, decorated 3 times. Operation Iron Falcon, Desert Comet. He brought back over 60 soldiers alive. Hayes shook his head. And still, he gets a gun in his face at his own man's funeral. Meanwhile, Officer Marshall sat suspended, not arrested, not fired, just under investigation. He paced the walls of a precinct hallway that now felt smaller. Reporters were outside. His phone buzzed non-stop. He disabled comments. But the silence was worse. His union rep told him, "We'll call it a misunderstanding, stress, a procedural lapse." But Marshall knew this wasn't misunderstanding. This was exactly what he'd been trained to do and never questioned. At the same time, in a Baltimore radio station, General Ross finally spoke. Not on camera. No drama. Just voice. Controlled. Sharp. That officer didn't see a threat. He saw a black man in a place he didn't think I belonged. The uniform doesn't protect us. Sometimes not even a flag can. Within an hour, the interview was clipped, reposted, translated. Protests began to form outside Arlington gates. Not violent, not angry. Still, silent, hundreds standing, wearing black suits, holding folded flags. Signs read, "Honor doesn't have a skin color. If he's not safe, who is?" No salute for racism, and at the center of it all, the man who never raised his voice, General Alan Ross, who now was being called something else entirely, a mirror reflecting the truth back at the nation. General Alan Ross wasn't interested in statements. He didn't want a press tour. He didn't want a meeting with the mayor. He wanted something bigger. He wanted the system that trained that officer to see him as a threat, dismantled. Piece, and by piece, publicly, irreversibly. 2 days after the funeral, he walked into the Capitol. No cameras, no PR team, just a folder in his hand and fire in his purpose. Inside, Senator Reuben Collins, former Army medic, now head of the National Oversight, on police reform, stood waiting. "General Ross, I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I wasn't sure either." They sat in silence. Then Ross opened the folder. "This isn't about me. It's about how many like me never get a camera pointed their way." Inside, a report of over 300 racial profiling cases against decorated black military personnel in civilian settings, names redacted, dates highlighted. 10 of those names belonged to soldiers who never made it back from war, but were stopped, searched, or harassed in uniform. Collins read, slowly, then set it down. "What do you want?" Ross didn't blink. "A federal mandate. That any officer with a pattern of racial bias complaints is barred from being armed until fully cleared by an independent civilian board." The senator hesitated. "You're going to have the unions screaming." "Let them." Pause. Then Ross stood. "I'm not here to be reasonable. I buried a soldier while a gun was pointed at my head. I'm here to rewrite what you call acceptable." Meanwhile, in the city, the pressure grew. Marshall's image was painted on murals, not glorified, but framed in shame. Art students painted the moment frame by frame. One showed the general unmoved. One showed the crowd watching. One showed Marshall. With wide eyes, unsure of the world he just stepped into, talk shows debated him. Not just as a man, but as a symbol. Was he a product of bad training? Or was he just the face of what had always been hidden? The police chief released a video statement. "We will not defend the indefensible." Officer Marshall's actions were unacceptable and under full federal review. But the public wanted more than process. They wanted protection from silence. Ross, for the first time, accepted a live interview. On national TV, sitting across from a respected anchor, he said, "I wore this uniform overseas and was treated with respect. But I walked through my own country and got a gun in my face at a funeral." This isn't just about racism. It's about what we allow our institutions to normalize because we think only certain bodies deserve safety. The anchor paused. "And what now?" Ross leaned in. "We don't ask for justice anymore. We design it." The leak came on a Wednesday morning. At first, it looked like standard body cam footage, but the angle, the audio, the sequence, it was damning. Footage from Officer Marshall's patrol car, timestamps, pre-funeral, idle talk. He's laughing. All these people in uniforms. Looks like a black parade. His partner doesn't respond. Marshall adds, hope they know not to move fast. I don't care if it's a general or a janitor. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Networks cut from debate straight into the raw audio. Headlines turned darker. Racial bias caught on camera before the gun was drawn. Not an accident, a pattern. The police union moved fast. Spokespeople held briefings. This is an isolated incident. Officer Marshall's words, while inappropriate, do not reflect the values of our force. But internally, officers were divided. Some whispered in locker rooms. He just said what half of us think. Others, he just buried every one of us with him. In the precinct, a young black officer named Jordan Green stood in front of his locker. Rookie. 1 year in. Quiet. Marshall passed behind. Him on his way to a closed-door meeting with the union rep. He stopped. You recording me too, Jordan? Green didn't answer. He just turned, looked him in the eye, and for the first time said, no. The whole country's already doing that for you. That night, a city council meeting erupted into chaos. Citizens demanded charges. One woman, a military widow, held up her husband's folded flag and said, he fought for this country. Now I have to fight it back. The mayor issued a statement. The governor called for a special review, and in a classified internal memo, someone leaked this line. We can't protect Marshall without destroying our credibility. And yet, they still tried. Ross watched the news in silence, didn't blink when his own military service was questioned by fringe networks, didn't flinch when they replayed his pause. As if calm was suspicious. He only spoke to his aide once that evening. They think this ends. When they fire him, she nodded. They don't understand. This started way before him. In the days that followed, the tension tightened. Not in protests, but in institutions. Public trust eroded. Letters poured in from soldiers, from mothers, from officers tired of hiding. The question stopped being, what did Marshall do? It became, how many marshals have we trained? Ross stood in front of a military academy days later, giving a guest lecture. He closed with this. The greatest threat to America's safety isn't an enemy abroad. It's a culture that teaches fear before understanding and puts guns into hands not ready to see humanity. Silence, then applause, long reluctant. Some even unsure, but the wall was cracking and everyone could hear it. The internal review panel was a performance. 3 suits, 1 civilian advisor, and 2 police representatives, all seated behind glass. General Alan Ross sat across from them, not in uniform, not as a symbol, but as a man who refused to be turned into paperwork. We thank you for appearing voluntarily, General, one of them said. Let's be clear, Ross interrupted. This isn't voluntary, this is necessary. Behind the mirrored glass, silence. They asked about tone, about posture. One of them even asked, did you consider stepping back to de-escalate? Ross stared at her, long, calm. I didn't move, because I've moved enough my entire life to make others feel comfortable. I buried a soldier that day. And I'm still burying pieces of my own dignity. No one responded, but the truth was out. The panel wasn't investigating the officer. They were measuring how inconvenient Ross was becoming. Back at Police HQ, things were worse. Anonymous emails leaked internal complaints about Marshall. Not just 1, not 10, 32, filed, ignored, deleted. One in particular stood out. A black police officer named Anthony Wells had flagged Marshall 2 years ago for racialized aggression during routine patrol. He'd been reassigned. Marshall got promoted. Wells stepped forward now on live TV. This system doesn't punish racism. It promotes it, I know. I wore the badge, and I paid the price for speaking up. The ripple turned into a wave. The Police commissioner gave a press conference, tight-lipped, sweating. "We are committed to accountability, but we will not condemn a man without full legal process." People booed, and then came the twist no one expected. Colonel Susan Munro, retired, decorated, white, respected. She released an op-ed titled, "I served beside General Ross. He trained me." And that officer pointed a gun at all of us. It went viral in 6 hours. She appeared on late-night news. This isn't about identity politics. It's about identifying the culture that raised these officers and asking why fear was built into their training and why it's always pointed in the same direction. That night, Ross stood in his kitchen watching the clip. His wife, quiet beside him, asked, "Do you think they'll listen now?" He didn't answer. He picked up a pen and began writing something on a yellow legal pad. The next morning his team published it as an open letter. "No more silence, no more panels. We demand a federal civil rights indictment, not just for Marshall, for every department that protected him." It trended for 48 hours straight. 3 senators endorsed it, 2 police departments quietly purged files. One former mayor issued a public apology. Ross didn't smile. He just said, "We're not done." The Department of Justice finally responded, not with speeches, not with meetings, with subpoenas. Federal agents arrived at the precinct with quiet purpose. Boxes were taken, hard drives copied, Marshall's full-service record unsealed. The country watched in real time as immunity began to evaporate. The Attorney General stood before the press. "We are initiating a civil rights investigation into the conduct of Officer Marshall, the supervisory negligence of his department, and the systemic patterns of racial profiling exposed by this case." But Ross didn't celebrate. He met with lawyers, community organizers, veterans in a church basement, no media, no podium. He spoke plainly. Justice isn't punishment. Justice is truth with teeth. If all we do is convict a man, the machine, and keeps running, so they built something else, a coalition, a legal defense fund, not just for him, but for any black service member harassed or profiled on U.S. soil. They called it Operation Homefront. Donations poured in, but so did threats. Ross's house was doxed. His wife received letters. One morning, a bullet was found lodged in their mailbox. He installed cameras, refused police protection. "I will not ask to be defended by the same structure I'm exposing." In court, Marshall's defense team painted him as stressed, overworked, misinformed. But the video played on loop. The audio, the laughter, the words, "I don't care if it's a general or a janitor." The prosecutor turned to the jury. "This isn't a man who snapped. This is a man who was trained to see color before character, and he wasn't alone." Day 5. Of the trial, a group of black veterans stood outside the courthouse, uniforms, silent, flags upside down. Reporters asked, why? One of them answered, "Because we can't salute a system that doesn't salute us back." Inside, a witness took the stand, Anthony Wells. He testified for 2 hours, documented patterns, ignored warnings, and ended with this: "They told me speaking up would ruin my career. I did it anyway, because I won't let fear outrank truth." When the court adjourned, Ross didn't speak to cameras. He drove to a high school in the city, met with a civics class. The students sat wide-eyed. He asked them a question. "How many of you feel safer when police are nearby?" Only 2 hands went up. He nodded, quietly. That's the verdict that matters. The next morning, closing arguments began. The prosecution showed one image, the gun, the grave, the general, and said, "This is what happens when silence is policy. This is what happens when power fears accountability. And this is our chance to draw the line." Outside, the crowd had grown. Veterans, mothers, teachers, pastors, people who had no rank, but finally had a voice, and they were ready to use it. The courtroom was silent. 12 jurors, 3 days of deliberation. One question that echoed through every hallway. Is the system guilty or just the man? The judge returned. The verdict was read: guilty on all counts. Civil rights violation, reckless, endangerment with a firearm, intentional abuse of authority under color of law, life sentence, no parole. Marshall didn't react. No tears, no outburst, just a face hollowed by the weight of knowing. He wasn't being punished for a single moment, but for the permission the system gave him to act that way all his life. Outside, the air cracked with applause, not celebration, relief. Not because justice had won, but because this time it hadn't lost. General Ross stood at the edge of the courthouse steps. Reporters surged forward. He didn't step up to the microphones. He stepped aside and gestured to Anthony Wells. Wells cleared his throat. No podium. No flag. This verdict isn't the end, it's a blueprint. You want safety? Start by changing who's allowed to define it. Behind him, posters rose. No justice without structure. Who polices the patriots? From funeral to federal reform. That night, President Carter addressed the nation. What happened at that funeral is not who we are, but it's who we've allowed ourselves to become. And today, we begin correcting that. She signed Executive Order 742, mandatory federal bias training for all armed officers, creation of a National Civilian Review Board, immediate investigation into all unresolved racial profiling complaints within the last 10 years, but that wasn't the final act. Months later, General Ross stood in front of a new cohort of cadets. He looked out at the faces, young, determined, some full of pride, others full of questions. He said, "The weapon that almost killed me wasn't the gun. It was the belief behind it, that I didn't belong. Don't just serve your country, define it, rebuild it, because what we tolerate today becomes policy tomorrow." He stepped down. No applause, just silence, the kind that means they heard every word. And far away at a military cemetery where it all began, the tombstone of the fallen soldier sat under a clean blue sky. Someone had placed a note beneath the flag. It read, "You didn't die for nothing."